Who can afford to flush away billions of dollars? And yet, that may be precisely what happens with World Cup stadiums. Watch on. The FIFA World Cup, with more than 5 billion viewers, is one of the largest spectacles on Earth. But what happens to the enormous and costly stadiums left behind when the event is done? Is all that money flushed down the loo? We'll look at the fate of World Cup venues in Russia, Brazil, and South Africa. We'll hear some new ideas from Qatar and find out why they've already dismantled one of their stadiums. Wait till you hear about the most innovative new idea in the history of sports stadiums. In preparing for the World Cup, Qatar built massive stadiums, elite training facilities, and sleek transportation systems. In all, they spent a staggering $200 billion on infrastructure, far more than any World Cup host has ever spent. It's like building the Freedom Tower in New York more than 50 times. Just 4 years earlier, Russia spent about $16 billion. And in 2014, Brazil spent $20 billion. But even $20 billion, 1/10 of what Qatar spent, is a great deal of money for taxpayers to bear, especially since the entire event lasts less than 1 month. Is all that money wasted? Countries hope for world exposure when they host the World Cup. They hope the new infrastructure will provide long-term benefits. New transportation might revive cities in disrepair, and sports venues might pay for themselves by hosting concerts and other events. It's a daring vision for destination venues that could pay dividends for decades. But sadly, that's not often how things go. The history of World Cup stadiums is not encouraging. Qatar has some bold new ideas that we'll get to soon. But first, let's see what they're working so hard to avoid. How did things turn out after past World Cups? Russia, in its preparation for the 2018 World Cup, built 9 new stadiums and refurbished 3 existing sites. Those construction costs ate up a sizable chunk of the $16 billion that Russia spent on the build-up overall. When the tournament was over, Russia planned to rent the stadiums to domestic football clubs. That made some sense since the stadiums had been built for sporting events, and ticket revenue could help defray the operating costs. But the plans didn't work. Most Russian teams struggled to sell even half the tickets to their games. At the Fished Olympic Stadium in Sochi, the home team often draws only 6,000 fans on game days. That's just 15% of the stadium's capacity. Because of this poor attendance, it's impossible to pay the operating costs. But there's more. Incredibly, only a year after the World Cup, Russia's costly Kaliningrad Stadium started to sink into a swamp. Saving it cost nearly $1 million. Financially speaking, they would have been better off just letting it sink. 8 of the 9 new stadiums in Russia are failing, with only 1 enjoying some success. The Kazan Arena has been converted into a multi-use space for sports, concerts, car shows, and fashion events. It also features restaurants, pubs, and hotels. Maybe changing the stadium into something very different is one of the pathways to long-term success. Qatar has some more ideas. But first, what about other host countries' facilities? Brazil proudly hosted the World Cup 4 years before Russia, and its venues tell a similar story. Domestic teams are happy to use the playing fields, but thousands of stadium seats stand empty. Even a country filled with zealous football fans simply can't fill these giant, oversized stadiums. The Arena to Amazonia in the remote city of Manaus is the most shocking example. The stadium seats 40,000 people, but the home team only pulls in crowds of 1,000 or less. Money is being flushed away at an alarming rate of more than $200,000 per month. And in a desperate attempt to defray costs, another World Cup venue, the Estadio Nacional, has recently served as a bus shelter. Meanwhile, the Das Tunas Arena is trying to generate revenue by hosting weddings and children's parties. Even more shocking is the fact that some of these venues hosted only 4 World Cup matches. Was it worth all this for only 6 hours of football? You won't find many Brazilians who think so. A quarter of the population lives in abject poverty. They'd rather see the country's money spent in some way other than flushing it down the drains of money-losing stadiums. Brazilian journalist Jose Cruz said it succinctly in 2015. "I don't see any World Cup legacy to Brazil except the debts we have inherited." South Africa played host to the World Cup 4 years earlier. Their stadiums are performing somewhat better than those in Russia and Brazil. The Moses Madiba Stadium in the city of Durban serves as a multi-purpose venue hosting various concerts and events. But it has a unique feature. Guests can ride to the top of the central arch where the brave can go bungee jumping. Not every stadium in South Africa is a success, though. The 65,000-seat Cape Town Stadium has never turned a profit. Calls to tear it down are made regularly, and perhaps that will happen. What about Qatar, though? They're keen to learn from the mistakes of their predecessors, especially since its candidacy was rife with controversy, and about 30 FIFA officials were forced to resign due to evidence of bribery and corruption. Things only grew worse in 2013, when Amnesty International revealed widespread exploitation of migrant labor. Many of these workers received meager wages or no pay at all, while being forced to work in dangerous physical conditions. According to a 2021 investigation by The Guardian newspaper, more than 6,000 laborers died in Qatar since their World Cup bid, dwarfing the numbers in other host countries. Qatar's reputation has suffered as a result. The one thing they haven't been criticized for is this: their bold plans for the World Cup stadiums once the competition is over. So, what are those plans? For a nation the size of Qatar, to maintain 8 enormous stadiums would be absurd. To put it into perspective, Qatar has a total population of 400,000 people. Meanwhile, their 8 stadiums combined can seat 420,000 people, more than all the people in the country. If Russia, with 140 million people, and Brazil, with 220 million, can't fill their World Cup stadiums, Qatar doesn't stand a chance. But filling the stadiums is not Qatar's plan. Instead, they want to transform them. The 2 biggest stadiums, Lusail and Al Bayt, will be renovated into cutting-edge, versatile spaces. Most of the seats at Lusail Stadium will be removed to create room for stores, cafes, a school, a medical center, and residential space. Similar transformations will take place at Al Bayt, where a hospital, a shopping mall, and a 5-star hotel will be built. The field will remain in the center of both stadiums' other features, but it will mostly be used to host community events rather than competitive sports. 3 other stadiums, Ahmad bin Ali, Al Janoub, and Al Tumama stadiums, will continue to host football games. but only after being dramatically downsized. All three stadiums will reduce their seating capacity by more than half, from 45,000 to 20,000, by removing temporary seating. Russia used this approach when they built temporary stands at the end of Ekaterinburg Central Stadium. What's more, Qatar pledged to donate the temporary seats to other nations looking to upgrade their sporting facilities. Even Qatar's smaller 20,000-seat stadiums will probably have trouble filling up, because the Qatari Football League has struggles of its own, sometimes drawing crowds of only a couple hundred people. The most creative solution of all, though, is Stadium 974. This brilliant model for the future is an entirely temporary facility. It's named for the 974 recycled shipping containers with which it was built. It can be completely disassembled and reassembled anywhere else in the world. It's a groundbreaking approach to sports infrastructure that just may usher in a new era. A set of temporary stadiums might be transported from location to location, rather than building costly new stadiums in each host nation. Qatar also plans to host certain future events in their World Cup venues. Brazil did this, using 5 of its past World Cup stadiums for the Summer Olympics in 2016. But after the Olympics, the situation in Brazil remained mostly unchanged. Qatar will host the 2024 Asian Cup, an international football tournament for teams from Asia and Oceania. The 2030 Asian Games, an international athletics competition with more competitors than the Olympics, will also be held in Qatar. They intend to utilize their World Cup infrastructure as much as possible for both of these events. They're also mounting a bid to host the Olympics, perhaps as early as 2036. Only time will tell whether any of these strategies will succeed, but one of them is already in motion. After hosting its World Cup games, Stadium 974 was disassembled. According to rumors, the components will be transported to Uruguay, which aspires to host the 2030 World Cup. What do you think, then? Are portable stadiums a smart way to host large sporting events? Are they the wave of the future? Tell us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and by all means, subscribe to this channel.